My name is Scott Leckie. I'm the founder and director of an organization called Displacement Solutions. And we work to resolve all forms of displacement throughout the world, whether caused by conflict, disaster, or climate change. The main goals of our organization is to ensure that every displaced person, notwithstanding the cause of their displacement, has their rights as they exist in law fully respected, protected, and fulfilled. This means that if a person is displaced because of conflict, they have the right to return to the place from which they were displaced. If they were displaced because of disaster, the same rights should apply. They should be able to go back to the place from which they were displaced once conditions are safe for doing so. And thirdly, in the context of climate change, it's a slightly different arrangement. There we argue that everyone affected by climate change is a citizen of the country they're from, is a holder, a beneficiary of human rights, in particular housing, land, and property rights, and that it's the duty of that government as well as the international community to ensure that every single person who's displaced because of climate change is afforded adequate housing, land, and property solutions to their displacement. There's various estimates out there in the world today about how many people will be displaced because of climate change. The lowest figure that you see routinely used is 150 million people throughout the world who will be displaced in various ways because of the consequences of climate change, and there are other estimates that go all the way up to 1 billion people. So we're talking about a tragedy of huge and epic proportions, and one that the world, as it now is organized, is absolutely incapable of dealing with. So we have a long way to go from the reality of climate change to the solutions. Climate change is not something that's only going to happen in the future, it's something that's happening now. And estimates in Bangladesh, for instance, from the Coastal Resource Center and the Climate Refugee Alliance point to 6 million people who have been permanently displaced because of climate change and a further 8 million who have been displaced temporarily because of climate change. That's just one country. There are a whole series of others: Papua New Guinea, Kiribati, Tuvalu, China, Vietnam, India, Maldives, and a range of others who already have seen people having to flee their traditional homes and lands because of rising sea levels, drought, the salinization of land, and for a whole range of other causes that are originally due to climate change. The work we were doing, for instance, in East Timor was we were asked by the United Nations to put together a plan that would enable the 100,000 people who had been displaced because of the recent conflict there to return to their original homes and lands. And so we put together a very comprehensive plan that could be used by the government there to make sure that all the different people who were in various camps throughout the country could go back to the communities that they were living in before the conflict. In Somalia, we did similar things. Somalia has, as everyone knows, is still engaged in a very unfortunate conflict which has reigned there for 30 years or so. And we worked there to find ways that displaced people could get some sort of recognition of their rights, even now in the context of the conflict. It's a very difficult situation there. It's about the worst place on planet Earth, actually, to work towards solutions for IDPs, but we were again asked by the UN to do that, and we put together a plan, and it's really sitting on the shelf right now, unfortunately, because the country is still as unstable as now as it was then. And then we've worked in a lot of countries that are affected by climate change as well, and in each of those countries what we try to do is try to develop with community-based organizations, local governments, national governments, concrete, viable, practical, costed plans that ensure to the maximum possible extent that, once again, every family who's affected by climate change has a solution. We can't wait until they're displaced in order to start finding ways to have those rights of those people respected and protected. We need to begin planning now. Most of the attention globally on human displacement tends to focus on the Pacific, particularly Tuvalu, Kiribati, to a certain extent, Vanuatu, and a range of other countries there. And it is a very serious and very severe problem for the Pacific in terms of some countries actually facing the prospect of no longer existing in a physical form in perhaps as little as 40 to 50 years. The number of people we're talking about is a manageable number. We can find permanent, long-term, sustainable, human rights consistent solutions for the entire population of the Pacific who will ultimately be displaced by climate change, but we need to start acting now in order to find those solutions. So it's not something that's impossible. It's not something that is going to threaten the stability of Australia, New Zealand, and surrounding countries. It's a problem. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be diagnosed. It needs to be looked at in every single possible way. And solutions need to be found now, and the political will needs to be found, but it is manageable and we can do it. And the time to start doing that is today. One obvious way for universities to help is to begin to sponsor courses on this question that over time become increasingly specific. One could imagine a general course in a political science department about climate change and displacement, or under a human rights program or a law program. That could then become a course on displacement in Kiribati, looking at solutions. There are IT courses that could also be given that would look at the development of a database, for instance, of likely displacement throughout the Pacific region, in terms of numbers of people, numbers of families, numbers of communities, the amount of land that's going to be lost, and the amount of land that needs to be found for resettling those people. A university like RMIT or others could very easily, based on existing capacity and technologies, begin developing those types of models and sort of policy recommendations for dealing better with this question. But I think really the sky's the limit there, and universities have traditionally played a very important role in policy development and across all sorts of sectors, and the time is really upon us now to use the resources and intellectual skills of universities like RMIT to begin focusing on solutions we need to ensure that every climate displaced person has a remedy, has their rights respected and protected, and has a place to go when their land is lost. This year for Displacement Solutions, we're focusing on 4 or 5 countries. Not all of them are climate change related. We're focusing a lot on housing, land, and property rights in Burma, trying to get justice for people who have been displaced and people who have lost their homes, people who are unable to access any home other than one that's in the slum. We're also planning a mission to Kiribati and Fiji and Tuvalu to look specifically into climate change problems in those countries, particularly displacement, of course, and beginning to identify in greater detail the political actors in those countries which can be used to help find solutions, to see the extent to which local grassroots organizations and movements exist or can be helped to be established, to focus specifically on the solution side of the angle. And then we'll also do work later in the year in Bangladesh with the Climate Refugee Alliance, the Coastal Resource Center, and a range of other groups, helping them to understand that they have rights under international law, and that it's the duty of the government, on the other hand, to find solutions for the already 14 million people who have been displaced in Bangladesh because of climate change. And of course we'll be centrally involved in the 10-10-10 meeting being hosted by the Global Dialogue Foundation, one of the purposes of which is to develop negotiated solutions to climate displacement throughout the Pacific.